Thank you. So, it's always hard first after lunch, but I just want to say as a vocal West Australian, hands off our GST for a start. You guys need to fix your problems here in Victoria and not have to come after that money. So, I want to talk to you about Blinklab, but before I do that, I just want to describe another company that I had. I've actually floated 7 companies on the ASX, and they've all been in the healthcare space. They've all come out of the great state of Western Australia. And this company I had was called called ResApp Health. You may have heard of it, some of the room. It was a very successful digital healthcare company. There's one over there. Thank you, Sean. And then this is another one, thank you. This company used signatures and the sound of a cough to diagnose respiratory disease using only a smartphone, which is a pretty cool idea, and I licensed it from the University of Queensland. The share price at one stage was up 2,500% from the time that we first floated it, and eventually the company was acquired by Pfizer in a deal that was worth a huge amount of money, and it was a very proud moment for me and my team. And so I was always intrigued by what a smartphone can do. Like, this is a pretty cool piece of tech, and it's got all these different features on it. It's got a forward-facing camera, it's got a screen, it's got a processor, it's got a microphone, a speaker. And I was always intrigued, what else can this phone do outside of just being a cough diagnostic technology, which was clearly very attractive to Big Pharma. And so that's where Blinklab opportunity came to me, and I thought, what Blinklab does is incredible. So I'll just describe it while you look at that, but essentially what we're doing is we're using a smartphone to diagnose a neurological illness simply from looking at you. And what the phone is doing is it's sending a bunch of impulses through your eyes, and it's invoking the facial reflex. Now, everyone here be familiar with the knee reflex, but you may not be familiar with the facial reflex. And the facial reflex will make you respond in a certain way, and hopefully, if this presentation works all right, you'll actually see a demonstration of that. But we can learn a lot from that reflex about your neurological condition. And so potentially we can use this for a whole range of things, like, be it dementia or depression and so forth. But this company is focused on autism and ADHD diagnosis at an extremely young age, as young as, say, 2 years old. And that's really important, because if you diagnose anybody with anything at a very early age, then you can introduce treatment that can totally disrupt their entire outlook, and certainly in the case of the burden on the healthcare system. So that's basically the overview. You can see that the company is it's currently capped at about $40 million. I mean, share price has held up pretty well in the current market. We've raised $7 million, and it was almost 1 year ago today. In fact, it was tomorrow. Tomorrow is in fact the 12-month anniversary of Blinklab's listing on the ASX. We haven't spent that much money, but that burn will increase now that we've actually commenced our FDA regulatory study in North America, and I'll talk more about that. I've got a terrific team of people involved in the company. Hank and I have just been doing a roadshow. We've been through Hong Kong and Sydney and now Melbourne. I'm looking forward to returning to Perth tomorrow. Anton Yuvarov, the co-founder, is also in the room here today. I encourage you to have a chat to Anton. Jane Morgan might be familiar to some of you. She's also a director as well. So what is autism? I mean, it's a neurodevelopment condition. It has a major impact on society. Hopefully some of the people in the room, or the people in the room don't have an autistic child, but I bet you know somebody who does. And it is a big impost and a big impact. And the problem is these kids are diagnosed late. And being diagnosed late really has an impact in their development. We know in terms of the cost to the system, and this is a massive economic burden. We're focused on the United States, that's why we're doing our clinical trials in North America, but the cost is only going up. And it's interesting to note that red dot on the top right of your screen is actually the cost or the incidence of prevalence of autism in Australia. I don't quite know the reason why Australia has such a high incidence of autism. Maybe Trump is right. Maybe it's got something to do with the COVID vaccinations. I don't really know. I do know this much, that the fact that it's such a discussable point, and it's a really, it's something that's in the news all the time, that's good timing for Blinklab. So I'm quite happy for Trump to go out there and blame autism on all kinds of things, as long as it's a discussion point.
Yeah. When was the NDIS introduced on that chart?
The NDIS was introduced during the Julia Gillard years, and someone might be able to answer that. Right. So what's interesting to those in the audience will know is that more than a third of the NDIS budget is actually spent on diagnosing and treating autism. That's an incredible amount that we're actually spending on it. We're a pretty generous society. And then you can see also that in terms of, actually I'll go back there, and that the cost of this 35% is largely in being able to habituate people with autism. So when they get to 18 and independent living, this is where the majority cost is. And I want you to look at that number because it's massive. If we can introduce an early diagnostic objective test for autism and then introduce treatment, then you can totally disrupt their lives and make them more independent. So that cost to Australian society is going to only go down with the introduction of earlier diagnosis, and no doubt the same would be in the United States, Europe, and all around the world. Now, it's said that in the paediatric space that all children should be diagnosed for autism, or screened at least, between 18 and 24 months. That is not happening. It's not happening because the diagnosis for autism is a subjective test. It's basically a paediatrician or a psychiatrist reviewing the patient, adding up a scorecard, giving you a score and diagnosing that way. It takes years, it costs enormous sums of money, and the end result is that children are diagnosed late, typically between 5 and 7 years old. And our technology can diagnose children as young as 2. At least that's what the clinical trials are demonstrating. This is just an article in The Australian. You can see that this is obviously a story. You guys read the paper. You can see that autism is in the paper all the time, and so is ADHD. So how does it start? So you've got parents who are concerned, the parents in the room, they know when there's something not quite right with their child. Now, by the way, most of the time there's nothing wrong with your child. Maybe they're not crawling yet or walking yet, talking yet, but they catch up, right? The incidence of autism is actually pretty low, but the cost to society is enormous in being able to screen and diagnose for them. So we know that there's sort of a loop that goes around and round in terms of being able to actually get treatment. It takes years, and it all results in late intervention. In terms of the digital solution, what we're introducing is something that is available in everybody's hand. You've all got smartphones. This technology works on a smartphone. That's the platform that we use, and that we can actually diagnose children as young as 2 years old. That results in early diagnosis and, of course, early intervention. For Jane, who was sitting next to me, she knows as a doctor that the earlier you can diagnose anybody with anything, the better the outcome for that patient. So that's what we're looking to introduce. Now, there's no noise. Let's just see what's going on here. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but essentially this child is about to undergo the test that Blinklab introduces. He's watching a little video. It's a cartoon, as you can see. It really doesn't matter what he's watching, but what's going to happen is there's going to be an introduction of a random noise. We didn't actually get to hear that noise, but in any case, there was noises and visual impact. There we go. Right, so what's happening here is this child is watching this video and being provoked with these random noises that he or she does not expect. And that's actually invoking an eye closure or a blink. Now, this is an automatic response. He can't stop it. And we can diagnose various neurological conditions with the forward-facing camera analysing the child's face by invoking these impulses. Now, let me give you something here. Now, this is probably the most important slides in the presentation. So we're going to take a neurotypical child who's 4 years old, and we're going to hit this child with, in this case, a single pulse. And watch what happens. I mean, you heard that sound, right? Let me just repeat that. See how the child blinks? Now that is a neurotypical response. Every single person in the room will do exactly the same thing in that test. That's not particularly exciting. What is exciting is this. Now this is the second test. This one is going to provide a double pulse. Now the double pulse actually sounds like one pulse. We've just slowed this right down. Okay, but you'll hear two pulses. The child will really only hear one in real life. And the brain is interpreting this. So let's see what happens. Oh, damn. Come on. All right, I'm not going to be able to make that work. Oh, there we go. Do you see the double pulse? You notice how the child blinked anyway. Right, now that is also neurotypical. Okay, he hears one sound, but it's actually two, and that's causing him to not blink. Did you see that? Let's try that again. See how he doesn't blink? Now that is neuroscience. That goes back about at least 100 years. There's nothing that we've invented here. But you notice how the child did not blink. Now let's introduce an autistic child. This child is definitely autistic. He's 2 years old. Let's do the single pulse. And he blinks. And you can see that in the red line. Now let's introduce the double pulse. And he blinks anyway. Now the fact that he blinks anyway is an absolute indication that this child is autistic. He can't help it, and that's exactly what happens. And the reaction time of that blink to the stimulus tells us a lot about where this child sits in the spectrum. Now this is 100-plus-year-old neuroscience. We're just the first company in the world to take it and put it into a smartphone and patent it, all developed at Princeton University in the United States, and exclusively licensed to Blinklab. And there's a lot more things going on there. You can see all the dots on his face. It's not just the blinking. There's other things going on in his face that we're also interpreting. So there's various facial reflexes invoked by our app, and it generates these biomarkers for autism. And so that's essentially what the phone is detecting. Now, we've already done a significant clinical study that was published in December of last year. It was about 450 patients. A third with neurotypical, 2/3 were autistic. But look at that table on the top right-hand corner there. This is presented in terms of sensitivity and specificity. This is what the FDA looks at. It's basically an indication of how accurate it is. 91% sensitive, 85% specific in that diagnosis compared to a pediatrician or a psychiatrist doing their subjective test. So it's our objective test versus the standard of care, which is subjective, which is producing those results on a smartphone, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now, there are two competitors. I would say neither of them are smart. One is Cognoa and one's ETD. Cognoa is using a smartphone, but it's just a video. They're just recording the child's face and then taking a video, sending it off to a pediatrician for analysis. There's nothing smart on the phone. But however, they did get a de novo approval, which tells you when you're investing in any sort of technology company, you want to know that the FDA considers the product to be approvable. Otherwise, you're really wasting your time. We already have a predicate in Cognoa, but you can see at 52% and 19% is not very accurate, not very useful. ETD is doing something very similar to what we're doing. They're actually looking at the facial impulses, but they're doing it on high-speed cameras set up in a hospital room. There's no scalability in their technology, albeit that it clearly very much works, but they're not using a smartphone. We're doing the smartphone using that facial reflexes, and you can see how accurate we have been in our substantive clinical trials. So this is an important one. What are we doing right now? We've actually started our FDA clinical trial in the United States. We've already onboarded 2 major hospitals. We'll be onboarding another 8 over the course of this year. I would suggest in the coming weeks there'll be a large number of new hospitals that have been signed up, a lot more patients that are being enrolled. We're splitting this trial into 2 parts. There'll be a first 100 patient study just to make sure that all the protocols are being followed, and that'll be followed then by another 700 odd patients in the FDA trial. You're going to get this trial completely finished by the end of this year, and then the results will come after that. So there's not really a long time. You don't have to do a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. There's no safety risk in using a smartphone. This is purely just based on efficacy. Now, this is the slide that I wanted to sort of close on. What you can see here is the actual patterns of the eye response to the impulse. And so you can see in autism, remember those 2 beeps that I was telling you about earlier? What you can see here in autism is that the child is actually responding more to the second beep, the louder noise. It's like a soft sound followed by a loud sound. And the child is responding more to the second sound than the first sound. Now that tells a doctor a lot about the neurological state of that child in terms of their ability to filter out their environment, which is generally the case for autistic children or autistic people at that matter. But we've also done extensive research in ADHD. Now ADHD excites me because the autistic or prevalence of autism is small compared to ADHD, which is at least 5 or 6 times larger market. And what we're finding with ADHD is that with the same developed product, so we don't have to modify anything. We've already got the tech, it's already been developed, and we can demonstrate that the people with ADHD respond more to the first soft sound and that blink. And remember, we're recording this in milliseconds. So the difference in the millisecond recording on the smartphone and the analysis that's done can clearly differentiate between autism and ADHD, which is a massive, massive tool because the treatment profiles are very different for autistic children versus ADHD people. Okay, so that's what we've demonstrated, and what we want to do is embark on a second clinical study in North America with the same connections that we have at the hospitals there and all the doctors that we're using, and actually embark on a second trial. And we want to run the second trial concurrently with the autism trial. So we've got 2 trials going together. Now we only have $4 or so million in the bank. We've got enough to fund the autism trial, but we don't have sufficient funds to go after the ADHD trial. We will be raising money, and we will be immediately embarking on an ADHD FDA regulatory study in North America. So we've got the 2 studies going together with the same product. So there's no more development to be done in terms of the algorithms and the AI. Just finally here on the team, Hank Bowl is a professor of psychiatry in Europe, based in Holland. And Anton is also a PhD, he's based in Perth with me and the team that we have. People might know Jane. People will definitely be, I guess, familiar with some of my companies, be it ResApp or Neurotech or so forth, but I've had some fairly big wins in that space. And just finally, in terms of investment highlights, you know, we're an AI company. I know that's talked about a lot, but the fact is it is AI, it is on a smartphone, it's scalable of hardware to get this product out in the marketplace. Everybody's got one. The way we think it will be used is likely to be, once it's FDA approved, it'll be used by medical practitioners, GPs predominantly, as a screening test. You know, every time your child goes to the doctor, be it for a snotty nose or a cut thumb or whatever that might reason be, they also do things like measuring the circumference of your head and putting you in growth quartiles. And they can also use this as a screening test to see if there's any early signs of autism or ADHD, and then take you through that system and it actually improves the hospital healthcare system enormously by introducing that sort of efficiencies that we can introduce. It is a standalone product. We're the only one in the world that's doing it, and I'm very proud to stand here and tell you the story, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Brian, you announced on Tuesday that within a month you've recruited 54 patients to your first phase of the trial. What do you attribute the rapid recruitment of that trial?
Well, I can tell you, thank you, Richard. The thing is that when you're doing a clinical trial in the US, there's a lot of uncertainties out there. And you know what, when you're dealing with a pediatric space, for any doctors in the room, they'll know how hard it is to get children enrolled in clinical trials. There's just a lot of burden of proof that goes through that. And they're typically really slow. And I can tell you, most biotechs get bogged down in the recruitment stage. But what's happened in the case of Blinklab is we've had an enormous response from the medical fraternities in the hospitals in North America, the doctors, and also the families. So the recruitment that we've embarked on has gone so much more rapidly than we anticipated. Now, I'm still saying that we're going to produce those results for the first 100-patient study in July. I'm being conservative there. Maybe it'll be earlier, but we'll see. But July is not a long time to wait for your first major outcome of what is essentially going to be one of the largest clinical studies in autism in North America. So I think there's just been a real interest in this technology and the need for such product being available to clinicians. Yes?
What's your proposed commercial model?
All right, so I've got two answers to this. Clearly with my ResApp health company that signatures in diagnosing cough, I was somewhat dreading having to go down the commercialization route. I actually had Apple come to me first and signed an NDA with ResApp to look to acquiring us. Soon after that, it was Pfizer. Pfizer moved much faster than Apple and ended up being acquired by Pfizer in September 22. I couldn't have been happier. That's one commercial route. The other commercial route is that we go down the adoption process. You need FDA approval for that. No doctor's going to use this if it's not FDA approved. So we have to spend the money, your money, to do those clinical trials, demonstrate its efficacy, and obviously clinical papers as well, like scientific journals is really important. We've already been published in 2 major scientific journals. That will go up as we start getting further into the trial and also getting to the end.
Do you charge per download or per use?
I think it'll be probably, we're thinking maybe $250 per use. The cost of diagnosing autism is somewhere in the tens of thousands of dollars. So if we can charge $250, even better if we get Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement in the United States, then that could bring down the cost to almost nothing. We'll still get that $250. There's 4 or 5 million children born in the United States every year, and you guys can do the maths on that. Yes, in the back?
Spoken to Trump's man Kennedy about this?
No, I haven't, but if you've got an introduction, I'd love to have it.
I would suggest you go and contact him direct, and I bet you if the right people over there will be able to make contact, because they're open for business. They say that autism is also related to diet, and Kennedy's right into that, diet.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think having an advocate like that would be terrific. I will say this about Donald Trump. I mean, love him or hate him, there's one thing that he's all for, and that is if you want to make money in North America, you've got to spend money first. And so if you think about where we're doing our clinical trials, they're not being done in Australia, they're being done in North America. Why? Because you have to show that you're spending your millions of dollars there. And then if you're successful, then you can make money out of the American market, and that's the market you want to be in. Yes, Jane?
One might argue that there's very little money to be made in screening tools, and there's huge amounts of money to be made in diagnostic tools.
Yes.
Having diagnoses legally acceptable from both state services, DAS, Medicaid, Medicare, etc., and also for people wishing to have access to the drugs that come with various diagnoses. Adult ADHD being a good example of legal access to speed.
Yes.
Would you be looking at adding in, at some point if you're able to, potentially some kind of, I think I would imagine some kind of virtual psychiatrist option so that we can have both the Blinklab and then have that approved by a psychiatrist to have a diagnosis there and then?
Well, I mean, I think that as a doctor, you know that if you want to see a specialist, you don't just go and make an appointment to see a specialist. You have to see a GP first. The GP is the gateway to the specialist. And I also don't think that GPs are particularly knowledgeable on neurological conditions. That's not their expertise. But not as much as, say, a psychiatrist would be, right? So the whole point is, if you've got an FDA-approved tool that acts as a screening test, then that acts then as the referral tool at an early age to go and see the psychiatrist or the paediatrician.
So you can see a psychiatrist, it just depends if you want to pay for it. You don't need a referral if you're happy to pay a full fee in Australia.
Yeah, and of course the problem is that I think that parents look at their children, and I'm a parent, that you know, you think your child's perfect and then they don't quite do things as fast as other kids do. Maybe they don't talk yet, they're not crawling yet, walking yet, whatever it might be. You know what, most of the time, in fact almost all the time, they're just slow developers, they catch up, right? But then we're getting the system bogged down with all these false calls for, is my child autistic, or does he or she have ADHD? So this is where this sort of screening test, I think, is an important tool. It can be low cost. Would I like it to be a diagnostic tool one day? Yes, I do think that would be a fantastic thing to have. But it has to be accepted by the psychiatrists, the paediatrics, and by the way, from the doctors that I know, they sort of like, you know what, I was trained for 6 years in psychiatry. What, you think this is going to do a better job than me? And I think that is a burden that you have to overcome, and that has to only come through adoption. So I think that using a screening test as a first point of call is the best way for us to enter the market.
But just to counter Jane's comment about screening, if only you knew how many hundreds of millions of dollars worth of screening test kits we sold during COVID. I would disagree with you very strongly that screening is the new horizon in a lot of medical devices. And nobody can wait to see a GP. Pathology groups wait 5 weeks to get their results. So screening is in.
Well, this test produces a result instantly.
So as we know, autism spectrum, is there granularity in the functionality of it, like the severity of...
Yes.
Yeah, so is that coming, or is it...
No, that's already, look, I probably didn't mention in the presentation, but we've already screened or had over 1,000 children in these clinical trials, not clinical trials, in the learning studies that we've done to develop our algorithms. So what we've been able to demonstrate is actually the ability to not only be able to diagnose someone with autism, but also be able to place them on the spectrum based on that facial response. And I'm not a scientist, but I understand it's all to do with the reaction time in milliseconds from the stimulus to the actual blink or the facial reflex that's being recorded on the phone. And by the way, these phones are pretty awesome. I should tell you that the studies that we've done to date have only been done on iPhones. Now, I'd like to expand that into other, like Samsungs and so forth, but the iPhones have proven to be a consistently excellent tool in their ability to be able, with the camera and the speed of the sensors and so forth, to be able to make that distinction.
Sorry, Brian, one more question.
Yes.
I'm curious to know your speed to market. Is there going to be an intermediary between you and the end consumer, or such as a medical professional?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I wish I'd actually pointed that out in my preso. So if you want to get this product approved by the FDA, and I certainly found this experience with my previous company, ResApp Health, you cannot make this a diagnostic tool in the hands of parents. Now, the parents can perform the test, that's all fine and good, but the diagnosis must go to the medical practitioner. And that is the only way the FDA will ever consider approving such a thing. And that is our model. So this is a tool that could be used at home, downloaded, paid for, but the diagnosis goes to the GP. And then that becomes a tool to assist a practitioner in making a diagnosis. And that is the go-to-business model for Blinklab. Now, will it be Blinklab that's taking this product to market, or is it going to be a big partner? I mean, my preference would certainly be the latter. I remember in my ResApp days, I used to get so many arguments with shareholders about how dare you think you could sell the company for hundreds of millions of dollars when it's worth billions of dollars. Yeah, you know what? I'm an entrepreneur. I like to make money too, and I want my investors to make money too. So I don't have a problem with partnering up. And if you look at a company like Opthea, and a massive disaster that happened a couple of weeks ago when their drug play, you know what their big mistake that came out was? They had a Johnson & Johnson licensing deal on the table. They rejected it to go alone, and they ended up failing their clinical trial, and now this $1.5 billion company is worth zero. So my attitude is license, have a big partner. Who's the licensor? Maybe it's Apple, maybe it's Pfizer Digital, who knows? I think it's appealing to all the like. But we're going to progress through the clinical trials and we'll get to an outcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.